Okay. There was an echo.
Hi, Barbara.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good. Hello, Rabbi. How are you doing?
Doing well. Hungry. Mm-hmm.
Nice service this morning.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was. I think they went well, and all good things. I'm going to actually start getting ready for the next two, but I'll stay on because I'm hosting the meeting. But I wanted to wish everyone a Shana Tova and Gemar Chatzma.
Same back to you.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I watched a little of the family service a little while ago. It was cute.
Oh, good. Yes.
Very cute. Yeah.
It's that whiteboard story. I had a fun time making that, so that was good.
That was awesome. Yeah. How do you do that? You just
it was with a program called Video Scribe, where they have like a library of different images of somebody, I don't know whose hand that actually was, that like draws them, and then you can speed them up or slow them down depending on how much I need to say during that part. So it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah.
Thanks, Cody. Oh, okay, good. All right.
I'll get some light. Esther, I don't know that we've met. You look familiar.
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah.
My kids are grown, so I haven't been to the synagogue a lot, just for this high holidays mostly.
Mm-hmm. Your children live in the area?
No, they don't. One lives in New York and one lives in Los Angeles. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we have nieces and nephews and they're all over the world, so I understand.
So we only have a little bit of time. This is Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, how's it going? Hold on one second. Let me see if I can get my technology is not cooperating. Let me see if I can get my video going. I wasn't having a ton of hello. I wasn't having a ton of luck. Here we go. Hold on.
Oh, hi. Hi, Leah.
Hi.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi.
Hi.
We brought the gift. Do you like our new apartment?
Woo.
I do like your new apartment. I like the yellow walls.
Thanks.
So how's school going?
Good. Shana
Yeah.
Tova.
Shana Tova.
Ole and tata.
Ole and tata.
That's awesome.
How you doing, Carrie?
Good, thank you. Excited to hear what Nicole has presenting. I love your background.
I do
Well,
too.
thank you.
How did you do that? That's awesome.
That's an excellent question. So I'm not entirely sure. I believe that I set it in the Zoom settings and then I didn't unset it. So now every Zoom meeting I'm in, this is my background and that's just fine. So.
Yeah, Esther, they give you choices.
Yeah, this is just one of the stock choices you can choose, I guess. So I like space. I like being amongst the stars. So makes me happy.
Good
So
place
I know we don't have a ton of time. So I'll just, for those of you who I don't know and maybe don't know me, I'm Nicole Coover-Thompson. I am the synagogue librarian. And we're going to be discussing, and I say we, whether you've read the book or not, the book How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. And so if you're ready, I mean, do we all feel, this is just, we're a small group, so we can all just kind of jump in. Do we all feel ready?
Sure. Go for it.
Okay, here we go. So first, thanks for joining me to discuss this book. I would be curious to hear from each of you in just a second, kind of what made you decide to check out this current event discussion today. The book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, hit bookshelves and kind of took off. I think that the timing of Kendi's book was part of why it was so successful, and it continues to be so successful. This is a conversation that's being had all over the United States right now. And I was introduced to, hi Alan, I was introduced to Ibram X. Kendi through his book Stamped from the Beginning, which is this massive book that sort of chronicles the oft untold history of the United States, and sort of how all the founding principles that is, American society today, how those were formed and who they were formed by. And that was huge for me because there were people in that book like Cotton Mather, historical figures that I had heard the name, but I really didn't have any context as to how they played a role in making America what it is today. And when I read books like White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, and I would, she talks a lot about socialization and about how whites are socialized to not have to talk about race, right? And we're socialized to behave in a very specific way and to basically kind of turn a blind eye to how society is structured to be for the benefit of whites and really nobody else, right? And that the goal is always to be white. And so this idea of socialization kind of struck me, and then I was able to sort of draw the parallel between that socialization and what Kendi talks about in Stamped, and how kind of America's value system was founded and where it came from. So How to Be an Anti-Racist is a fascinating book, and it's really it pushes my buttons, certainly, because it challenges ideas that white liberal authors will write about when it comes to race. Kendi is very comfortable saying that everybody is capable of being racist, and that being racist is defined as supporting or expounding racist ideas and systems, right? And that anybody, regardless of race, is perfectly capable of doing just that, and that racism isn't uniquely white. Now, that goes against the grain of just about every other kind of literature on race that I've read at all, ever. So just his definition of racism and who can perpetuate it was challenging for me. Not in a bad way, just in a way that made me go, okay, well, it's not what almost anybody else is saying right now. And he's got some critics as a result of that. He breaks down ideas of like what it means to be an abolitionist, what it means to be anti-racist, which is, they're two different things, right? And that and he kind of goes through this whole thing. The book itself it's not terribly long. How many of you have read it, just out of curiosity?
I've read it.
Barbara's read it. Anybody else read it?
I've read probably 1/3 of it.
1/3 of it. Okay. Anybody else? Ellen, Carrie, Peggy, and Howard. Is it Howard? I can't see the whole name. Okay. If you've, we're still on notes. Come on now. Stop. Okay. So the book itself, before we get to the notes section, which is intense. I mean, he's an academic, right? So this is most of his work. He does all of the citing. And so the notes section is, you can't see it because of my background, is like 40 pages long. The book itself is 238-ish pages minus the acknowledgments and the notes. And that 238 pages is extremely dense. So it's not, it's more accessible than Stamped. Would you agree, Barbara? It's more accessible. Did you read Stamped?
Well, yeah, I want to mention something about Stamped. I did not read Stamped. However, I looked at the number of pages and went, oh, and kind of put it on the back burner. But in the meantime, I found a young adult book
Jason
that
Reynolds.
is out with that Jason Reynolds wrote with
Yep.
Kendi,
Yes.
and it's very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a quick and dirty look at Stamped, I recommend it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Stamped from Stamped, a remix with written by young adult author Jason Reynolds, is phenomenal. We're actually doing that at my school. That's the first book that we're reading for our Read Woke Challenge in the district. So highly recommend that one. Way more accessible, storytelling-ish. It's not as heavy and academic. How to Be an Anti-Racist makes an attempt at not being too academic. It does. Stamped, much more academic. Still narrative. It's still what we would classify as narrative nonfiction. It's still storytelling, but it's not as heady. But I mean, for those of you that have not read the book, he spends a lot of time sort of talking about tracing the history of like where he was and his own racist ideas, right? And then fast forwarding into him becoming an anti-racist and what anti-racism really means. And his definitions are interesting. I think they're straightforward, but they're not maybe what you would expect them to be. Barbara, do you remember the definitions that they kind of talked about when it came to anti-racism and racism? So do you remember your understanding of it, I guess? And Esther, I'd ask the same of you if you read the, a third of it or so. Do you remember the definitions are like first chapter?
Yeah, well, I do remember I was struck by somebody saying they're not a racist is actually neutral.
Yes.
It's not really doing it. Anti-racism, and I've seen this, and I actually have a sweatshirt that says anti-racism is a verb. Because to be anti-racist is really to be actively involved in the process of making things, of working towards equity. So if it's self-reflection, if it's doing something, whatever, to put a dent in systemic racism at whatever level, it's being actively involved.
Yes. And it's actively confronting your own racist ideas, right? So it's actively doing the internal work and the external work. And that's, so in the book discussion, which, Barbara's a part of, that we've been reading White Fragility. The interesting parallel there is that we've talked a ton about the fact that it's really difficult to figure out how. And every book that I've read, including How to Be an Anti-Racist, even though it says how to be, right? So it's like I'm expecting an instruction manual. It's not what I get, and there isn't one, right? So like there's the instruction manual. The only instruction manual I've ever found about how to confront racism internally and then externally is in workshops, right? So like. And in actively doing the work in a group of people, which is really hard to do, because it requires a degree of vulnerability that we just don't sort of regularly spend time in, and that's exhausting. And it's sometimes very depressing, kind of depending on what you're covering. So I think that with How to Be an Anti-Racist, for those of you that have not read it or have only read a little bit of it, the how-to part, I never get there. I get a lot of ideas about what it looks like to be anti-racist, right? So I have examples. He provides examples from his own experience, with people that he's, you know, worked with or has seen or has watched or has followed that demonstrate instances of anti-racism. So it's like, okay, here's a model for you. Now, the hard part is replicating, and there's not really a way. So it's an interesting take. What, for each of you, if you could, tell us what is it about this discussion and this particular book that brought you here right now, when we're all very hungry, and we all, and it's, you know, this is a very unique Yom Kippur. So what brought you here today? And if you haven't read the book, do you plan to? What are you hoping to get out of the next 20 minutes or so? You can use the chat too, if you'd rather not put on your mics for any reason.
So I read a little bit of it, and it was part of a book club reading that I'm in from the University of Chicago, alumni club. And I just was wondering if anybody else had any other information or thoughts about the book other than what my book club had. That's why I joined.
Okay.
And I thought it was interesting. My husband is Mexican, and he gets furious when people lump Black and brown people together as a discrimination thing, because he doesn't feel like that there's been very much discrimination in his life. So I'm trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That is something that I have heard. And I've heard it in the communities that I serve. So I work in a school that has a very high Latino, Latinx population, right? And so that's a discussion that we often have. And in our White Fragility book discussion group, which all of you are welcome to come join us. And when I say all of you, I mean, you know, the the 4 additional people that are not already in it. I think because we're going to continue the discussion beyond just that book. We're going to start listening to podcasts and having further discussions about, like, we're going to read excerpts from How to Be an Anti-Racist. We're going to take pieces and parts and just continue talking. There is a section of that book, and we had a very lengthy discussion about the fact that racism against Black people in the United States is very unique. And because it has its roots in chattel slavery. So that's where we have systemic racism that affects a lot of people of color, right? But if you really, really look at the systems that are in place, the people that it is meant to disservice the most are Black Americans. So, you know, yes, that discussion, that is something that is noted by a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that those systems of oppression don't affect all people of color in some way, shape, or form, right?
Oh no, and I agree with that. It's just,
yeah.
There's nothing that makes him more furious than that. So it's interesting.
And that's understandable. I understand it, because I think groups who experience oppression, we experience it differently. And right. I think it's awesome that he recognizes that, no, my experience with oppression is different. So right. Don't lump me in. I get it. That's interesting. So how about Peggy? Is it Peggy and Howard? I don't know. And Carrie, what are your guys' thoughts? Are you still with us?
Are we not muted now?
Hi.
You are not muted now. Hi.
Hi, Thomas.
I plan to read the book. I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
The book for our parent series at the school district, and there'll be a discussion tomorrow night. So I just was thinking I'd like to know a little more about it, and I'm planning to read it.
Awesome. What school district?
District 87.
87, okay.
The Glenbard district.
Glenbard, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Glenbard is doing a lot of that work. Evanston is doing a ton of this work too, right? Doing a ton of community events, which is awesome. And they're open to the public. So, okay, great. So you're just hoping to kind of learn a little bit more about the book and about what it dives into?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And Carrie, how about you guys? And I don't know who's next to you.
This is Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Allie, sorry.
It's okay.
Allie, I haven't read the book yet, so I was
Okay.
interested in knowing what it was about. And
Mhm.
obviously you gave a little snippet, so I'm curious to know what it is about. So I'll have to read more so I can follow a little more in the discussion.
Yeah, it's this book. Like I said, probably the best thing that I can tell you about this book is that this book defines terms that we use talking about racism in the United States specifically, okay? It defines terms differently than almost any other piece of literature I've read. It helped me understand his lens when he wrote Stamped, because there were parts of Stamped, which again, highly recommend the young adult version. Please read it. It's great. You can read the big long version too. It was free on Spotify for a while, so there's that. You could listen to it. Because it's this big. It's huge. But okay, so I don't have we heard the term internalized racism? Do we know that term?
Yes.
Do we know what it means? Okay. So internalized racism is this idea that groups of oppressed groups of people, right? Or in this instance, we're talking about people of color, have internalized these stereotypes that have been placed upon them, right? And sort of accepted or internalized these ideas about themselves or the group of people that they belong to. And that is almost always subconscious, right? So that would be a Nerf gun that just went flying. So in this idea of he takes that, right, this idea, and I don't actually recall, and Barbara, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't recall him using that term at all. He just says everybody's racist. Everybody has these ideas. Everybody has been socialized and taught these ideas through curriculum. It is all subconscious. And until you start to sort of peel back the onion layers of all of the things that you have been taught, regardless of the color of your skin, you can't be anti-racist. Like you have racist ideas that were fed to you. And so he never actually breaks it down any further. He doesn't, which to a degree I appreciate, because if you look at all the other literature that's currently being, kind of really pushed out there as far as, talking about race and racism in America, they all have these, there are subcategories for subcategories of different types of oppression and racism and, how those things sort of manifest in systems and in individuals and in communities. And if you were to draw it as a tree of all the things that are related to one another, all the different terms that were related to one another and how they impact something we call intersectionality, right? So the places that they all cross, it's extremely overwhelming. So one of the things that Kendi does really well is he takes all of that away and he's like, let me just give you the big pieces. Okay. Here's what happens. The truth is that if we say that, some groups of oppressed people can internalize racist ideas, right? I'm not going to call it internalized oppression. I'm just going to ignore that term. And we're just going to say that everyone holds racist ideas. And then here's why, right? So Kendi has this ability of sort of stripping away all of the things that often make these conversations really hard and make learning about all of this really hard and making it as simple as he can. And actually, that's probably one of his biggest criticisms. And he gets that criticism not from the white community, but from the Black community. And they say, you're taking away all the things that make this complicated and that make this, that are important to understand. And I think that criticism is valid, but I think that for me, speaking for myself, to enter into this kind of work, it's easier for me to digest a handful of terms and digest sort of how those things operate in my daily life and how I see it and interact with those things than taking on, a book this big worth of terms and ways that things, you know, interconnect and work to create systems of oppression. So that's, I recommend this book to everybody who's doing this work. But I like to also just warn people that it doesn't sort of embrace these other ideas that white liberal writers about, you know, the white left writes about racism. He does not write the same way and on purpose. And he, you know, so he has a very unique way of presenting the information. Do you guys have any questions? Anything that you've heard about the book that makes you kind of go, I don't know about this? Or Barbara, anything that you read that you've wondered about?
Well, I just wanted to go back to what you said about, you know, the way he tells this book is, he talks about himself, and he talks about his own experiences growing up. He talks about his parents and so while he doesn't use the term internal racism, he realizes at some point that he is also racist because of ideas that he has had about Black people, and he realizes that he's had some privilege, and he actually moves when after college. I think he moves to a poorer neighborhood than he lived in, and he's really getting to develop more of a sense of what most Black people have been dealing with. And he also recognizes some of his own racism, I think, when he has experience in college where he becomes friends with a gay man, a gay student, and realizes the process that he goes through. So it's also kind of a racist thing. But yeah, I do recommend the book. I like the way he interweaves his personal story into it.
And I would agree. I thought it was really interesting the way that he won a contest, some kind of speech contest, yep, for talking about, and the whole crowd was cheering when he was talking about, you know, that there's some Black people that are bringing down our population, and they're the ones that are, I mean, and he yep, this was his speech, right? And he was talking about there's good people and there's bad people in our race, and these are the bad people that are not living up to what they could be. And I just thought I thought him putting in his experiences and how he changed really showed you sort of the journey that was really interesting.
Yep.
And it's not the people, it's the policies.
Right.
And that's the main thing you do come away with. It's, you know, you talk about, you know, violence in the streets, or, you know, whatever, you could talk about people, what they're doing, how they're reacting to things. But it's not those people, it's what led them to those acts. And that's the systems that we have, the foundation of our country.
Yep. One thing that I found helpful when I read this was actually, I had stamped next to me when I was reading it, because there are references that he makes that are in stamped. And because I'd already read Stamped, I was, you know, sort of cross-referencing sort of what he was talking about and how he was, you know, what he was referring to as far as those foundational things that created the systems that we have today versus, you know, things that have evolved. The piece that I will say that he doesn't, so I mentioned intersectionality before, right? So class does play a big role in him recognizing the privilege that he had growing up. He did not grow up having the same experiences that a lot of Black Americans have in the United States, and it took him a long time, as both Esther and Barbara suggested, took him a long time to recognize that. And he talks about the policies and the systems that, create systems of oppression, but he spends a great deal of time discussing how class has a big part to play. And that's through his own experience, right? So like Barbara, when you mentioned that he, moved to a poor neighborhood, there was intentional choice on his part, realizing that his life experience did not allow him to see the world in the way that a lot of Black Americans see the world, right? So he was doing everything he can to sort of remedy that, right? And that's one of those anti-racist choices, right? So like, what does it mean to be anti-racist, and how do you become an anti-racist? You make choices like that, right? Like you don't choose to move into the nicer suburb because it has better schools, right? You make the opposite choice, right? And what impact that has is significant. And why is it significant? But still, when I read this book, and I remember that piece, and I remember another book discussion that we had, very similar, that was brought up, and then it was just, we all discussed like where we lived, right? And I thought about the fact that I'm like, okay, all right, still, and this is for me, so I'm speaking from my perspective. I live in a majority community, right? So I live in Elgin. We have, where my kids go to, our school ratings are, I don't care. We have great school, but the choice to live here, right? I still, as a white woman living in sort of middle class, right? Regardless of where I live, I seem to still have the same kinds of opportunities that the people I work with that live in Park Ridge, which is fantastically white and very wealthy, right? I still manage to have the same opportunities, right? So like when we talked about where we live, when we talked about class, yes, it has an impact, but it doesn't have as big an impact, I don't think. That's where Kendi and I disagree, right? So like in everything that I've read, he talks about class and privilege being something that does tie to class. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's totally true. I think it can be kind of true, but it doesn't tell the whole story about how class impacts your ability to sort of move through the world. I still have more opportunities than many of my neighbors do for a whole ton of reasons that are ridiculous and make me angry. But recognizing that was huge for me, because in my head, when I started doing this work, I was like, oh, look at me. I'm doing something great, and I'm making an anti-racist choice, and I don't want to move out of my neighborhood, and I love it. And I'm like, I just really wanted kudos. I wanted somebody to pat me on the back and tell me that I was a really good person because of that. And I'm like, when I realized that, I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to go hide under a rock now, because really that just makes me a terrible person seeking sort of like validation that I'm one of the good white people. Like that's what I was doing. And and there are still moments where I find myself doing exactly that. And I will go, I'm going to shut up. So this book makes you confront some of that. For me, it will make you confront things that you're like, oh, wait, what? I don't know if I agree with that. And you're allowed to disagree. And then usually those disagreements that you have with anything that any kind of author presents usually come from a place of something in yourself or in the way you've walked through life that has sort of informed that thinking, right? So for me, the fact that I grew up really, really poor, for a long time made me think that I was at more as much a disadvantage as anybody else, right? And it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I realized, no, that isn't true. And so, yeah, I don't know. I really like the book. I think that if you read this book, you should also read at least the YA version of Stamped. I think that those two things are almost necessary to go together. For me, it certainly was. And if you're into audiobooks, the audiobook of Stamped, Jason Reynolds reads it, and it's phenomenal. He's a wonderful storyteller, like really, really good. And that one you can listen to with your kids. I have a 12 and a 9-year-old, and we listen to it with them. So, and they want to listen to it again. So I'm all for it. It fostered a lot of really good discussion. So I don't know. That's all. That's questions, comments, concerns. Molly, my turn. It's my turn for a dog to get upset. Goodness gracious. Questions, comments, concerns.
I appreciate your offering this discussion today.
Me too.
You know, Carrie and I haven't really read the book. You know, we kind of just stepped in because I wanted to just kind of hear, you know, what other people thought, like, about these types of topics. One of the things that I think that, Nicole, that you kind of picked or kind of spoke about a little bit was, you know, everybody has a tendency to run on some really bad ideologies. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter your race, you know, whether you're white, black, Asian, whatever. It's just kind of human nature that, you know, the ideologies that are out there kind of shape us and we're not even aware of it, you know? So just hearing more and more people being, you know, open to those ideas, it's, you know, I appreciate that, because I grew up, you know, in Gary, Indiana. So that was, you know, in and of itself an experience. And, you know, in a lot of ways, I'm still catching up with the rest of the world. And, but so, you know, topics like this, you know, that these are things that are good. And, you know, I'm glad that it's a conversation that's happening.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh, you're gone, Nicole.
Hi. Technology. Sorry about that. I just didn't click the button. I would really, really strongly invite all of you to join us on Sunday afternoons, right? So on Sunday afternoons from 4 to 5. We have been having a book discussion about the book White Fragility, right? Which has been very fruitful, I think. I mean, I feel like it has, Barbara. You can say, nope, it's terrible, yes. Don't come. No. Like, I don't know.
Very good.
And we now want to just continue talking, right? And we've dived into a lot based on that book, but we've talked specifically about the how, you know, how to do these things, but also talked about ourselves, right? So the work that we've done over the last, I don't even know how long it's been at this point, has really been internal, right? So we're reading a book that sort of makes us, me as a white person, confront some things that I didn't want to confront. And this is probably my 4th time through that book. I'm still coming up with stuff where I'll read it through and I'll be like, oh, I didn't get that the first 3 times, dang it. Yeah. So, but beyond that, as we're wrapping up the book in the next week or so, and then we're moving on to listening to podcasts. So we aren't going to be requiring the reading of an entire book. We'll read excerpts from things, articles, we'll listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos, TED Talks, things like that. And we're just going to continue this discussion. So I would really, really love it if you guys would like to join us. You don't have to come every single week. It's just sort of a standing thing. And if you would like to, you know, send me your email and let me know, and I will add you to the email list.
Yeah, and the Zoom link is always in the beyond our borders, beyond our walls, beyond our building newsletter that comes out every week. So you can always check that out for the Zoom and just come on in. Yeah, it's really been interesting because one of the things we talk about in there and is the idea that, you know, trying to have conversations with people or reacting to something that somebody says, you know, a friend or a family member, and trying to learn the best way to see them. I mean, you become aware that they and you in the past, I mean, you and maybe still are, but trying not to be very defensive. I mean, it's the first thing. Somebody makes a joke or an offhand comment, and I've done this to a family member, and I said, well, what, that wasn't really funny. Or, you know, if you said that in front, you know, that would really hurt somebody's feelings. Well, you know, I was joking, you know, I'm not a racist. And that's the first thing people say.
Mhm.
And, you know, trying to have that conversation, and you almost see them physically just kind of backing up. Because it's a true lack of awareness, because it's so ingrained in us.
Well, and we've obviously, the book White Fragility focuses on whiteness, right? And the reason it focuses on whiteness is because white people in the United States really never have to talk about it. We don't have to consider ourselves white, right? We say we're American, right? But let's be really honest. When we say we're American, when white people say we're American, we're saying we're white. We're saying we're American, America is white. Now, that's a big statement to make. And people get so angry with me when I say that. But what that really means is that that's the norm, right? The country was founded, well, it was taken away from people, and then it was founded by a bunch of white guys, okay? So the norms, the socialization, the foundation of American society is inherently white, and it's inherently white European, right? And it's, you know, it's a bunch of colonizers, right? So there's this very specific mentality that founded this country. And if you draw it all the way back, which is why I recommend Stamped, if you draw it all the way back, you can see it. You can see the thread go all the way through history and go, oh, I see it now. That's fine. I get it. People get upset because they assume that as soon as you start saying someone's white, or, you know, talking about race with someone who's white, the idea of white fragility, that fragility is coming from never having to confront that. Because if you talk about it, that must mean it's bad. And people instantly go, well, I'm not a bad person, so I don't want to talk about this anymore, so go away, right? And that's that fragility piece, that defensiveness. And yeah, we've all been sharing our stories of talking with family members and going, and just hitting a wall. So it's a lot of work. It doesn't, I've been doing this work actively, meaning like I have taken a significant number of courses, and I've done the readings, and I've been participating in discussions like this, and I've been doing equity work in my school district, and right, for about 3 years, which means that I'm like a baby in this process. I don't know. I just barely started. So, and this process actually never stops, right? So that's really the key, is that the work never stops. There's always something to confront. All right, we are right at, I believe, right at 3:15 and 3:14. I don't know who's coming on the family hike later, but I gotta go gather my children. We don't live very close to Downers Grove, but we're gonna try to get out there and go on the family hike, get ourselves out of this house. I hope you guys are all having an easy fast.
You too.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you
Nice
guys.
to meet you, Thomas. Bye, Carrie.
Bye, Carrie. Bye, Thomas.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Is Harriet still here? No?